Alright, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to start this lesson off by giving all the praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahushai, Bahashim Rakakudash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Honors to all our brothers who are fervently preaching the word. Salakia, in sincerity and in faith. And Shalom to all the sincere believers, which includes the Israelites who are scattered amongst these other nations and look like these other nations. Now, this lesson is going to be a quick one, primarily based on this precept, Job 14 and 5. And I'm going to get another precept to go along with it. So, Adawan Ratazah, you find this lesson edifying. So, Job 14 and 5. Seeing his days are determined, the number of his months are with thee. Thou hast appointed his bounds that he cannot pass. And this scripture is in reference, or the scripture is twofold. Because on the one hand, it is talking about like your physical time, like your physical time limit on this earth, like how long your lifespan on this earth is. Everybody has a limit to, when they live and when they die, but it's twofold because this can also mean your power, the position that you're in. Because right now, Esau, the so-called self-proclaimed white man, he's in rulership over the earth, and we are in the last days, and we're in the last days of Esau's wicked, unholy rulership. And that's why everything is going wrong for these devils. That's why they're getting exposed left and right. News about them being pedophiles and doing child sacrifices and eating children and just being just like just disgusting people. That's been coming out more and more. And I was like struggling to like find the word to use, because there's so many different words to describe just how vile and just degenerate these Edomites are. Like we really are getting a glimpse at what true wickedness looks like because of Esau. Like Esau is the human embodiment of evil and wickedness. A lot of brothers have said that Esau, the so-called white man, is the human counterpart to the spiritual demon Satan. And I can see that, like all the wickedness that these Edomites have done in the past and continue to do to this day. It's just like, you as a just regular sane person, your mind doesn't even go there. And it's like, even though those of us of the hopeful elect, we are not surprised hearing about these things and learning about these things that Esau is doing, it's still like just freaky, because it's like, damn, like there's really a group, a nation of people out here that are they're just vile, they're just degenerate to the core, they're just wicked. Like that's why whenever the scriptures talk about the wicked in reference to Esau, it's in capitals, because they are the wicked. Like they're as wicked as it can possibly get. And the main point of this lesson was the fact that Esau, the so-called white man, he's going to go down very soon. But also his female counterpart, the so-called white woman. Because there's some of these white women who, they're singing a different tune now, because they starting to realize that the so-called white man doesn't respect them. He doesn't care about them. They're not equal to him, and now they want to quote unquote switch sides and try to be allies with with people of color. But it's like, nah, because up until you started catching some hits, you were perfectly fine with what your wicked male counterpart was doing. But now that the so-called white woman is starting to be affected by it, now all of a sudden she don't want to, align herself with the so-called white man anymore. And it's like, nah, when he goes down, you're going down right along with him. Like, there is no escaping that for her. She ain't going to be able to play the whole, oh, I'm just a woman, I didn't partake in it. She's not going to be able to just say that and get away with it. It's like, nah, you knew that this man was wicked and vile from the get-go, and you played along and you co-signed everything. You participated in it. So you're just as guilty as he is. Like, these so-called white women, they think that they can run away from their judgment that they're going to receive. And that's not the case at all. Both of their days, the so-called white man, and the so-called white women and their wicked demon spawn, are going to be taken down. And I have this definition here. It says, bounds he cannot pass, from Job 14:5, refers to the divinely appointed, unchangeable limits placed on a human's lifespan. It means that Yahweh has predetermined the length of a person's life, and they cannot die sooner nor live longer than that set boundary. And that is 100% true. But like I said earlier, the scriptures are twofold. It is talking about your lifespan, but it's also talking about whatever position you're in. Like Esau knows that he's going down. These Edomites know that they're losing power. They know that their time to rule is almost up, and they're trying everything to try to go past that time limit, to go past that boundary that the Lord set up. That's why Esau is going to do this whole microchipping thing. Like, he really wants to try to extend his time, but he can't, because the Lord already gave him a limit, and he can't pass that limit. Once he hits that limit, it's game over, and he is very, very close to hitting that limit. And like I said, you just take a look at everything that's happening, in particular here in the West. Everything is falling apart for these Edomites. These Edomites, especially here in America, but also up there in Canada, in the UK, France, Germany, Italy, anywhere where these Edomites are, everything is falling apart for them. And they're blaming people of color for it, so-called black people, the Hispanics, the so-called Native Americans, the so-called Asian people, the Somalians. They're just blaming everybody for it. They're like, oh, there's just too many of these people here. We need to get rid of them. They're the problem. And it's like, no, we're not the problem. The problem for you is the fact that the Lord created you to be wicked, to be the wicked, and he set an appointed time for you to rule. And now your time is almost up. Like, that's nobody's fault. Like, it's not anybody else's fault that the Lord created you to be the wicked. It's not anybody else's fault that all these Edomites have done since they came into power was rape, rob, and murder, and colonize, and put people in slavery, and oppress the people, and destroy the earth. Create genetically modified food, and they poison the water, and they put chemtrails in the air, and they kill off species of animals and kill off species of insects, and they cut down the trees, and they constantly drill it into the earth, and they don't give the earth any rest, which they're supposed to do because of the land Sabbath. That's nobody's fault that Esau is just a complete degenerate and he can't do anything right. And I've been saying this for a little while, that the only thing that these Edomites can do right is to do everything wrong, because that's how they were created. They were created to be a complete 180 to righteousness. Like, righteousness is like poison to these people. That's why so many Edomites don't care about the whole Epstein files. They don't care that there's a bunch of Edomites that are okay with messing with children and child sacrifice and eating children and all of that disgusting, degenerate stuff. There's a lot of Edomites that are like, well, yeah, we don't care, because they're all wicked. They all think the same. You know, that's their version of a perfect world, where they can just do all manner of disgusting, degenerate, vile wickedness, and nobody holds them accountable for it. That's what they want. That's their perfect white, so-called white world. But the Lord is not going to let them have that. And the Lord is just going to continue to break away at Esau's power. And the more Esau loses, the angrier he's going to get, and the more violent he's going to get. And for all the people that want to run around and say, oh, everybody's hating on white people, but they're not that bad, people are going to find out exactly how this devil gets down. And it's not just going to be so-called black people, so-called Hispanics, so-called Native Americans that Esau is going to go after when the Lord lets him loose. He's going to go after his own people too, because these Edomites, they're divided. You have the Edomite Democrats, the Edomite Republicans. You have these, the Christians versus the Jews, the so-called Jews. There's a lot of division amongst these Edomites. So when the Lord causes all hell to break loose in this country, and the race wars and the civil wars pop off, it's not just going to be Esau versus Jacob. Esau going to be going after his own people too, because not all of his people align with the wickedness that he, is okay with. Like, at the end of the day, Edomites are Edomites, whether they agree with certain things that he's doing or not. If you're an Edomite, then you are an Edomite. There is no getting around that. There is no getting away from that. Just like if you're an Israelite, then you're an Israelite, and there is no getting around that. Even though 2/3 of our people are wicked and they're going to be destroyed, at the end of the day, they are still Israelites, and in the kingdom of heaven, they're going to be put back in their right mind. They're not going to be wicked in the kingdom. But here, they are wicked. But just because they're wicked does not change the fact that they are Israelites, and in the grand scheme of things, they are still the Lord's chosen people. And these Edomites, they are still the people that the Lord hates. They are still the wicked, and they're still going to be destroyed. That is their fate, their destiny, whatever people want to call it. That's the lot that the Lord has placed them in, to be the wicked, to go around and cause nothing but death and destruction and chaos and misery. And then when their time was up, they're going to be removed out of power. They're going to be placed in slavery for 1,000 years, and then they're going to be erased off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. And God, Job 9:24 here. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? And clearly, these Edomites are the wicked. They're the ones going throughout the world causing all sorts of chaos. Like, just look at what Trump is doing right now. Trump is a prime example of an Edomite. He talking about taking over Canada, taking over Mexico, taking over Cuba, taking over Venezuela. He wants to bomb Iran. That's Esau right there. Just being a murderous, warmongering, colonizing devil. That's who he has always been, and that's who he will always be as long as he is around. And a lot of people are starting to realize that and wake up to that. They're starting to wake up to the fact that these so-called white people are the problem. If these so-called white people were not around, this wickedness would not be going on. And that's why we need the kingdom of heaven. That's why we need the Lord to come back and destroy this place and put these devils in chains. Because when these devils are allowed to roam free, everybody suffers, even his own people. Because in Esau's hatred towards people of color, primarily the Israelites, who primarily make up the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, in his hatred towards us and his effort to destroy us, he's destroying his own. There's a lot of Edomites that are on drugs. There's a lot of Edomites that are on welfare. There's a lot of Edomites that are living in the projects, in the ghetto, in the hood. Esau's wickedness affects his own people. And that's what Esau doesn't. It's not that he doesn't know that that's going to happen. He doesn't care. Esau does not care about anybody but himself. The so-called white man does not care about the so-called white woman. He doesn't care about these children that he has with these so-called white women. Clearly, because he be doing a lot of ungodly things to these children. So these Edomite men, they are the primary example of what wickedness looks like. But as I said, these so-called white women, they're just as guilty. Because while the Edomite man has been out here physically committing crimes against humanity, these so-called white women, they've been, benefiting from it. They've been standing side by side with that so-called white man while he's committing these crimes. These so-called white women, they'll cheer it on. They were very proud of that once upon a time. And a lot of them still are. A lot of them still very much are proud of it. But there are some of them that are trying to escape that. And it's like, no, there is no escaping it. Like, you are who you are. If the Lord made you an Edomite, then that's who you are. There is no running from that. There is no getting out of that. The judgment that is meant for these Edomites, which is for them to fall out of power, to go into slavery under the Israelites, and then be erased off the face of the earth after 1,000 years of the most hardcore, brutal slavery that any nation has ever endured. That's the lot for Edomites. That's the lot for the so-called white man, the so-called white woman, and their children. And I just found it funny because, I've been on TikTok lately and I've been seeing, a lot of these Edomite women, they've been trying to like distance themselves from the Edomite man, talking about, oh, now they're going to divorce their husband and, they don't want nothing to do with that side of things and all of that. And it's like, nah, the only reason why you're talking like that is because you're starting to feel what everybody else has been feeling. The suffering that your male counterpart has been putting everybody else through, now you're starting to experience that suffering and you don't like it. So now all of a sudden you want to act like you're an ally when you've never been and never will be an ally. You will always be our enemy. And we will always look at you as such and treat you as such. So like that's the main point of this lesson, was the fact that these Edomite women, they think that they can distance themselves from the Edomite man. And it's like, no, y'all are two peas in a pod. Whatever wickedness he was doing, you were okay with. You would smile and laugh alongside him. You would co-sign whatever he was doing. But now all of a sudden you want to throw up your hands and try to back away, like you don't have blood on your hands too. And that's just not the case. The Lord, he sees everything. He knows exactly what you so-called white women, you Edomite women, have been up to and what you've been doing. And you're just as guilty as your male counterpart. So when your male counterpart gets taken down, when he gets his hits, when he gets his judgment, you're catching the same judgment. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up here. In closing, I want to give all the praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim Rakakudash, the water Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai, for putting the spirit on me to do this lesson. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Honors to all the brothers who are still fervently preaching the word in sincerity and in faith. And shalom to all the sincere believers. I hope you all stay strong, stay safe, stay fervent, stay circumspect, stay prayed up, and Adawan Ratazah. Till next time, shalom.